What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we will be breaking down underdog pick'em lines that I love going into week 16 of the 2022 fantasy football season. If you guys do enjoy today's content or find it helpful, be sure to hit that like button on the way in. Hit that subscribe button. Of course, if you're new to the channel, really does help us out when you guys hit that like and consider subscribing. And of course, if you guys are new to Underdog Fantasy, you guys can double your first deposit up to $100 with promo code The Catch. You can be like me and win $10,000 at halftime of the Chiefs Titans game, or you can be like me and lose $1,000 when Jalen Waddle needs like 5 more receiving yards to hit your prop. Whatever you do, be sure to gamble responsibly and have fun. On top of that, happy holidays to all you guys out there. Wishing you guys a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Going to have a lot of good football over Christmas weekend and a lot of good games to throw some props at. So without further ado, let's hop into today's video. All right, a game I'm taking a heavy look at is the Bills and the Bears. This is a game that is going to have some inclement weather. And when we look at this Bills offense and the Bears offense, there are two things I really like about both quarterbacks, Josh Allen and Justin Fields, and that is the fact that both of these guys can absolutely run the ball. And if we look at what happened last week in Buffalo and Miami's matchup when Josh Allen was forced to run the football, he had a very successful day on the ground, 10 rushing attempts, 77 rushing yards. In week 14, he had 47 rushing yards. In week 12, 78 rushing yards. In week 10, 84 rushing yards. So his line right now sits at 49.5 rushing yards. He has obviously hit that in 3 matchups since week 10. So I do like the higher on Josh Allen's rushing yards. I also like the higher on his total yards. I think this game will actually be a little bit more competitive than people think. So I think that Josh Allen, either on the higher total yards or higher rushing yards, are both good props. On top of that, another player who I will take week in and week out, and the higher for his rushing yards, is Justin Fields. Until we see him not be an absolute threat on the ground, I am taking his higher week in and week out. Right now, it sits at 75.5 rushing yards. He hit that in week 15, week 11, week 10, week 9, week 7. So literally since week 7, he has hit that in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 matchups. In week 13, he had 71 rushing yards, was not far off. In week 8, he had 60 rushing yards, was not far off. Once again, expecting bad weather in this game. I expect Justin Fields to be forced to run the football quite a bit. He had 15 rushing attempts against the Eagles in a competitive matchup last week. I expect Justin Fields alone to be able to keep the Chicago Bears competitive in this ball game. This is a home game for the Bears. I love everything about this prop. It's a little bit high, don't get me wrong. If you're not comfortable with it, I could understand it. You could probably go for maybe his fantasy points at 17.85 or higher, but ultimately I think the rushing yard prop is almost a lock week in and week out for Justin Fields. So I absolutely love this prop moving into week 16. All right, next up on the list, we're going to talk about DJ Moore, wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. I like his prop of more than 53.5 receiving yards. I don't mind his reception line, but I kind of like the total receiving yards a little bit more. Obviously, Moore was hurt in week 14 against Seattle, but in week 12, since Sam Darnold's return to the quarterback position, so to speak, at 103 receiving yards in week 12 against the Denver Broncos, a very good defensive unit. Week 15, a poor defensive unit in the Pittsburgh Steelers, had 73 receiving yards. This week, he gets the Detroit Lions, a team that is allowing the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position at the moment, a very weak secondary for the Detroit Lions. The strength of that defense is going to be up front against the run. So I love this prop for DJ Moore. I think it's a very realistic prop for him to get more than 53.5 receiving yards. And don't forget that the Panthers are still technically in the playoff hunt. Obviously, the Lions have been humming. They are in the playoff hunt as well. This should be a good competitive game. We're not really expecting bad weather last I checked in this matchup. So overall, I think DJ Moore over 53.5 receiving yards, a very good prop moving into the weekend. All right, Devonta Adams had a down week in week 15 against a good New England Patriots defense. 28 receiving yards for Adams in week 15. And when we look at his total season, right, he has 4 games where he has not had more than 69.5 receiving yards, and he plays one of the worst secondaries in the league in the Pittsburgh Steelers. This weekend. I love this prop for Adams over 69.5 receiving yards. I don't mind the reception prop, but I definitely like the receiving yards a little bit more. The Pittsburgh Steelers are on the very, very bottom of things when it comes to the playoff hunt, but they are still in it. I expect this game to actually be a little bit more realistic than people think. Obviously, the Raiders also on the outside looking in. Got a lot of good competitive matchups going into the weekend. When we look at this matchup for the Raiders and the Steelers, two very bad defenses overall. I expect Davante Adams to be heavily involved. Even in week 14, when he only had 3 receptions off of 7 targets, he still had 71 receiving yards. He has literally hit more than 70 receiving yards every week since week 9, except for last week, week 15. I think this is an absolute lock. It's a little bit of a higher line than I usually look for, but for a player like Davante Adams, this is a pretty low line. He's usually set at like 85 or higher receiving yards, sometimes 90, 95 or higher. So I love this prop moving into the weekend. All right, Saquon Barkley has scored a touchdown in 4 of his last 6 matchups, and this weekend he will be facing the Minnesota Vikings, a team that is allowing the 12th most fantasy points to the running back position, a defense that has been playing very poorly as of late. Just looked at last week against the Indianapolis Colts, although they played well in the second half. At the end of the day, still really struggled in the first half against a bad Colts offense. So I love Saquon Barkley to score a touchdown. You know, I don't really go for touchdown props, but the fact that it's a rushing or receiving touchdown makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. He's coming off a really good game against the Washington Commanders, a good run defense. He played well against them in week 13 as well. He had a rushing touchdown in both those games. He had a rushing touchdown in week 12 against the Dallas Cowboys, another good run defense, although he did struggle in week 14 against the Philadelphia Eagles. I am not worried about Saquon Barkley. He's running back number 5 overall in fantasy right now. I know that, you know, props, betting, definitely a different world outside of fantasy, but overall he's had a great season. Like I said, don't always go for touchdown props, but I feel pretty safe about this one going into week 16. All right, the other running back I had planned for this video is J.K. Dobbins, who, when I was planning out this video, his line was set at 58.5 or more rushing yards. At the time I'm filming this, his prop is not available, so they're probably raising that line a little bit. Even if they raise it, I mean, like 58.5 felt like a lock for me, felt like a steal. The Atlanta Falcons, a very, you know, poor defense, especially against the run, and Dobbins has had 120 or more rushing yards in his last 2 games. So I loved the prop for J.K. Dobbins. It might be available for you guys. It's not available for myself at the moment. It's worth noting Gus Edwards has 55 or more rushing yards in his last 2 matchups as well. His line at the moment sit at 37.5 rushing yards, so I think that Gus Edwards is a pretty decent pick. But the player that I really want to go after is J.K. Dobbins. So keep an eye on, you know, how high they raise Dobbins' line throughout the weekend, or I mean going into the weekend, going into tomorrow, right? But at the end of the day, J.K. Dobbins, if he's available, 60, 70, maybe even 75 or 80 rushing yards or more, I feel very comfortable with. If they come out with the line around 58 or 60 rushing yards, I would absolutely take J.K. Dobbins on the over rushing yards against the Atlanta Falcons. And Gus Edwards, not a bad secondary pick if you are not able to select J.K. Dobbins moving into the weekend. All right, let's talk about one tight end going into the weekend, a position that's been absolutely awful as of late. But Juwan Johnson has had 42 or more receiving yards in every week since week 9, except for week 12 against the San Francisco 49ers. He missed week 13, was on bye week in week 14. So all in all, he has had 26.5 or more receiving yards in every game except for weeks 8 and week 12 and week 13 where he did not play. Listen, I know this game is supposed to be awful weather, probably the worst weather game of the weekend, but look at what Evan Engram was able to do for the Jacksonville Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence last night in a bad weather game. You know, the tight end position can commonly act as a security blanket for the quarterback position, and Andy Dalton loves Juwan Johnson. I really think in a bad weather game, this is probably the only prop I would take, and out of all the props for the Browns and the Saints, I really like Juwan Johnson over 26.5 receiving yards. I would do so with caution. There's not really a lot of tight end props I like for the weekend. The position's been absolutely awful as of late, and Travis Kelce always has super high lines. So Juwan Johnson, a little bit risky due to the weather, but I think that it could pay off. I think that, you know, the weather could actually positively impact Juwan Johnson. But outside of that, I would definitely stay away from the Saints and Browns props moving into the weekend. But I wanted to throw one tight end in the video for you guys. So I would take Juwan Johnson at the higher over 26.5 receiving yards if I had to pick one tight end going into the weekend. One last matchup for you guys to take a look at, kind of trust your gut here, is the Packers and the Miami Dolphins. This game is in Miami. It's supposed to be one of the better weather games for the weekend. The Packers in a must-win situation, the Miami Dolphins in a position trying to stay in the playoff race. So I like both these teams right now. I like this game script. Look around, there's some good lines. Tyreek Hill to score a touchdown. Jalen Waddle over 12.45 fantasy points. Keep in mind that is a half PPR scoring format. Christian Watson at over 54.5 receiving yards. Maybe a little risky when we look at kind of the receiving work he got last week with Romeo Doubs back out there. Aaron Jones over 54.5 rushing yards. I kind of like. Even Aaron Rodgers to throw 2 touchdowns. Overall, I just like this game script. I think it's going to be a good competitive game script for both offenses, and it's supposed to be a good weather game, which we're not getting a lot of going into the weekend. So kind of take a look at the Packers and Dolphins game if you guys want an extra prop or two to select going into the weekend. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Hit that subscribe button, of course, if you are new to the channel. And please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below, as well as any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to Underdog Fantasy or Underdog Pick'ems. I'd be happy to answer them for you guys. Of course, always remember, gamble responsibly, and nothing in this video, of course, is guaranteed. Just like to give you guys some props that I really like going into the weekend. With that being said, happy holidays to all you guys watching this video. Merry Christmas to everyone. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.